Deep in America's heartland, where endless cornfields meet the horizon, John Miller's tractor hit something that made a sound he'd never heard before. A peculiar, metallic ring that echoed across his family's century-old farm. He laughed it off, as just another old piece of equipment buried by time and toil. But that sound was about to change everything. When a team of archaeologists arrived at his doorstep, their eyes gleaming with excitement, John realized his ordinary morning had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Buried beneath decades of rich soil lay an artifact that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about ancient American civilization. As word spread, his quiet farm became the center of an international sensation. What mysteries lay beneath those endless fields? And why had they remained hidden for so long? Before we continue this incredible journey, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story captures your imagination, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's revelation will leave you speechless. The morning had started like any other on the Miller farm. John's calloused fingers traced the worn silver case of his great-grandfather's pocket watch, a ritual as natural as breathing. 4:30 a.m., right on schedule. The watch hadn't kept perfect time in decades, but that didn't matter. 5 generations of Miller men had used it to start their days, and that meant something. He slipped the watch into his coverall pocket, its familiar weight a comfort against his chest. The kitchen's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he poured coffee into the same chipped mug he'd used since Sarah left. 10 years now, but some habits were hard to break. Through the window, the pre-dawn darkness shrouded his 160 acres in mystery, the same land his ancestors had worked since before the Civil War. The bank statements spread across his kitchen table told a different story. Modern farming wasn't kind to operations like his. Too small to compete with the corporate giants, too big to qualify as boutique. Last month's equipment repair had eaten through what little cushion he'd managed to save. His daughter, Jenny, away at college studying agricultural science, kept telling him to diversify, to try organic farming or one of those fancy CSA programs. But John Miller grew corn, just like his father and his father before him. The pocket watch ticked steadily as he gathered his tools. The old Ford tractor needed starting in this cold, another repair bill waiting to happen. But first, he had to check the irrigation system in the north field. Something had been off with the pressure readings all week. Dawn was just beginning to paint the horizon when John reached the problematic section. The soil here had always been different, darker, almost metallic in the right light. His father used to say it was because of an old creek bed, long since dried up and plowed over. The ground felt solid enough under his boots as he walked the line, checking for leaks. That's when he heard it, a hollow ring that didn't belong in a field of corn. His boot had struck something, sending a vibration up his leg that felt more like hitting a church bell than any rock or piece of machinery he'd encountered before. The sound lingered in the air, almost musical. John crouched down, brushing away loose soil with practiced hands. Whatever lay beneath felt smooth, impossibly smooth for something buried in a working field. He chuckled, shaking his head. Probably another piece of old equipment, buried and forgotten. Lord knew there was enough of that scattered across the farm, the detritus of generations of millers trying to scratch a living from the earth. The pocket watch pressed against his chest as he leaned forward, trying to get a better look in the growing light. For a moment, just a moment, he thought. He saw something gleam beneath the dirt, a pattern that looked almost like writing, but unlike any script he'd ever seen. "Getting as foolish as old Joe," he muttered, straightening up. Old Joe had been the local treasure hunter, always convinced the next field would yield Spanish gold or Indian artifacts. He died still searching, leaving nothing but a collection of rusty nails and broken pottery behind. The sun was properly up now, and John had real work to do. He marked the spot with a piece of orange survey tape. He'd need to dig it up anyway to check the irrigation line. The sound had been strange. He'd give it that, but strange things turned up in fields all the time. Part of farming was learning to take the unexpected in stride. Back on his tractor, John patted the pocket watch through his coveralls. 5 generations of millers had worked this land, and he'd bet every one of them had found odd things in their fields. Whatever was down there could wait. The corn couldn't, but as he drove away, that metallic ring echoed in his memory, as clear and pure as a bell on Sunday morning. And despite himself, despite decades of practical farming experience telling him otherwise, John Miller couldn't shake the feeling that something important lay buried in his north field, waiting to be found. 3 days after hitting the mysterious object, John was greasing the tractor's fittings when an unfamiliar vehicle turned onto his gravel driveway. The sleek SUV looked out of place among his weathered farm equipment, kicking up dust as it wound its way toward the house. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. The woman who stepped out wasn't what he expected. Dr. Sarah Chen wore practical boots under her khakis, and her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being taken seriously, despite looking young enough to be Jenny's older sister. "Mr. Miller," she extended her hand. "I'm Dr. Chen from the university's archaeological department. We received a rather interesting call from your local historical society." John shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "About that thing in my north field? Look, I appreciate you coming out, but it's probably just some old farm equipment." She smiled, but her eyes held an intensity that made him pause. "That's what most people think at first. Would you mind if we took a look? I brought some equipment that might help us know for sure." Before John could respond, 2 graduate students emerged from the SUV, unloading what looked like expensive scientific equipment. One piece resembled a lawnmower without blades. "A ground-penetrating radar unit," Dr. Chen explained. "We'll create a detailed image of what's beneath the surface," she said, already walking toward the north field. "Like an ultrasound for the Earth." John found himself following, the pocket watch ticking steadily against his chest. The morning sun had burned away the dew, leaving the air heavy with the promise of another hot day. As they walked, Dr. Chen asked questions about the farm's history, noting down his answers in a small, leather-bound notebook. "Your family's been here since before the Civil War?" She looked up sharply. "Have you ever found any other unusual objects? Pottery fragments, stone tools, anything that seemed out of place?" John thought about the box of odds and ends in his barn, arrowheads, strange rocks, pieces of metal his father had collected over the years. Nothing worth mentioning. Old Joe, our local treasure hunter, he used to say this whole area was special, but old Joe thought every field held buried gold. They reached the spot marked with orange tape. The graduate students moved with practiced efficiency, setting up a grid with string and stakes. Dr. Chen knelt, examining the exposed surface where John's boot had struck the object. "Interesting soil composition," she murmured, sifting it through. Her fingers. "Much higher clay content than I'd expect for this region." The ground-penetrating radar unit hummed to life, making passes across their marked grid. One of the students watched a tablet screen intently, occasionally calling out coordinates. John stood back, feeling increasingly out of place on his own land. "Dr. Chen?" The student with the tablet waved her over, pointing at the screen. John watched their faces as they studied the readout, their excitement palpable. "Mr. Miller." "Doctor." Chen called. "Would you like to see something remarkable?" He moved closer, peering at the tablet. The black and white image meant little to him at first, shadows and shapes beneath the soil. But as Dr. Chen traced the patterns with her finger, structures emerged. Perfect geometric shapes, far too regular to be natural. "This isn't random, Mr. Miller. These are constructed features, deliberately placed. And based on the depth and arrangement," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "This site could be significantly older than any known settlement in this region." "How much older?" We'll need to do proper excavation to be sure, but these patterns, she shook her head, wonder creeping into her professional demeanor. They're consistent with pre-Columbian construction techniques we've never documented. This far north, the pocket watch felt suddenly heavy against John's chest. He thought about all the generations of millers who had ploughed this field, never knowing what lay beneath their feet. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying, Mr. Miller, that you may have discovered something that could rewrite the history. Books. She held up the tablet, pointing to a perfectly circular formation. This isn't just some old farm equipment. This is deliberate. This is significant. And if I'm right about what we're seeing, she took a deep breath, your North Field might be one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the Midwest. The sun climbed higher as more equipment appeared from the SUV. Dr. Chen was already on her phone, calling in additional team members. John stood in his field, watching strangers map the ground his family had farmed for generations, and felt the world shifting beneath his feet like loose soil after a heavy rain. The next morning, John's quiet farm had transformed into a buzzing research site. White canopy tents dotted the north field like mushrooms after rain, housing equipment he couldn't begin to name. Students in worn jeans and university t-shirts moved with purpose, carrying tools and tablets, speaking a language of technical terms that made his head spin. Dr. Chen had established her command center under the largest tent. Maps and printouts covered a folding table, held down against the breeze by coffee cups and equipment cases. She looked up from her work as John approached, coffee in hand. Perfect timing, she said, gesturing to a particular readout. We're ready to begin the first test excavation. I thought you might want to be here for this. John nodded, touching the pocket watch in his coveralls. Where do you want me? Right here. She pointed to a spot beside her as the team assembled. It's your land, Mr. Miller. You should be part of this. The excavation began with meticulous care. Each layer of soil removed and documented with scientific precision. Students photographed and logged every detail, creating a three-dimensional record of their descent into the earth. John watched, fascinated despite himself, as centuries of his family's farming were peeled away centimeter by centimeter. 3 feet down, a student's brush revealed something that made Dr. Chen leap forward. Stop! Everyone stop! The entire team froze. Dr. Chen knelt by the pit, using a small brush to gently clear away soil from what looked like carved stone. As the surface emerged, John saw patterns that couldn't be natural, precise lines and curves that spoke of human hands. Extraordinary, Dr. Chen breathed, photographing each stroke of her brush. The preservation is remarkable. The stone marker, when fully revealed, was about the size of a dinner plate. Its surface bore intricate geometric patterns that seemed to spiral toward the center where unfamiliar symbols were carved with precise skill. What is it? John asked, drawn closer by the team's evident excitement. A positioning marker, I believe. Dr. Chen's voice held controlled enthusiasm. Ancient builders used stones like this to lay out important sites, but this design... She shook her head. I've never seen anything quite like it. More students gathered around as she carefully measured and documented the find. John heard whispers, saw phones being pulled out to take pictures. His quiet field was becoming famous. The craftsmanship is incredible, one of the graduate students said, sketching the patterns in a notebook. Look at the precision of these cuts. These aren't crude tools we're talking about, Dr. Chen nodded, making her own notes. The style suggests sophisticated mathematical knowledge. These spirals aren't random. They're following a specific geometric progression. How old? John asked, the question that had been burning in his mind since they started. Dr. Chen looked up, her expression carefully neutral. We'll need to run proper tests, but based on the depth and style, she paused. This could be over 1,000 years old, possibly much older. The number hit John like a physical blow. 1,000 years. His family had worked this land for 5 generations, and all that time this had been waiting beneath their feet. There's more, Dr. Chen said, pointing to her tablet. The radar shows similar markers forming a pattern. Whatever this is, it's part of something much larger. As if to emphasize her point, another student called out from a nearby test pit. Dr. Chen, we've got something here too. The day progressed in a blur of discoveries. Each hour seemed to reveal new mysteries, new questions about what lay beneath John's fields. By sunset, 3 more markers had been uncovered, each bearing similar but distinct patterns. Standing at the edge of the main excavation pit, watching the last light catch the ancient stone's carved surface, John felt the weight of history pressing down like the soil itself. The pocket watch ticked against his chest, marking time as it had for generations of millers. But now, for the first time, he found himself counting backwards through the years, wondering who had worked this land before his family ever arrived. Dr. Chen appeared beside him, her excitement tempered by professional restraint. Mr. Miller, I need to make some calls. This is bigger than my team can handle alone. Are you ready for what comes next? John looked at his field, at the careful excavations that had already revealed so much. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, she said quietly. But some discoveries, they belong to everyone. The sun set over his cornfields, painting the white research tents in shades of gold and shadow. Tomorrow would bring more experts, more equipment, more revelations. His quiet farm life was ending, transformed by what lay beneath the surface of his fields. John touched the pocket watch one more time, wondering what his ancestors would think of their land's new harvest. Not corn or wheat, but history itself. The university's archaeology department moved faster than John would have thought possible. By noon the next day, his kitchen had become an impromptu conference room, filled with professors and graduate students hunched over laptops and maps. The smell of coffee competed with the musty scent of old papers spread across his worn oak table. Dr. Chen stood at the center of the activity, coordinating with colleagues across the country via video calls. The positioning markers align perfectly with known copper trade routes, she explained, pointing to a newly created digital map overlaying satellite images of his property. But this site predates any documented settlement in the region by centuries. John watched from his usual spot by the coffee maker, feeling like a stranger in his own home. His daughter Jenny had driven up from college as soon as she'd heard the news, and now sat among the students, her agricultural science textbooks forgotten in favor of archaeological journals. "Dad, look at this," she called, waving him over to her laptop. The screen showed a complex network of lines stretching from the Great Lakes down through the Mississippi Valley. These are the known prehistoric trade routes. The copper came from Michigan, but they've never found a major distribution center this far east. Until now, Dr. Chen joined them, spreading out a newly arrived set of historic maps on the table. The copper trade was incredibly sophisticated, she explained, tracing routes with her finger. Native Americans were mining and working copper in Michigan's Upper Peninsula thousands of years before European contact. They created vast trade networks, but we've always had a gap in our understanding of how the metal moved through this region. A graduate student rushed in from the field, clutching a tablet. "Dr. Chen, the metallurgical analysis just came back from the lab. You need to see this." The room crowded around as Dr. Chen studied the results. John watched her expression shift. From professional interest to barely contained excitement. "The composition matches," she announced. "The metal object Mr. Miller struck with his plow, it's definitely Upper Peninsula copper, and the dating—" She paused, double-checking the figures. "It's consistent with the peak period of prehistoric copper mining, approximately 3,000 to 5,000 years ago." The implications rippled through the room. Jenny grabbed her father's arm, her grip tight with excitement. "Dad, do you realize what this means? Our farm, your field. It's not just some random site. It was part of one of the most sophisticated trade networks in prehistoric North America. John touched his pocket watch, thinking of all the generations who had worked this land before him. Not just his family, but the ancient traders who had walked these fields thousands of years ago, carrying copper from distant mines. There's more, Dr. Chen continued, pulling up new images on her tablet. The ground-penetrating radar is showing what appears to be a series of structured spaces, workshops, storage areas, possibly ceremonial sites. This wasn't just a trading post. This was a major center of commerce and craftsmanship. The implications were staggering. His simple corn farm, passed down through 5 generations of millers, had been an ancient industrial center, a place where prehistoric traders had gathered, where copper from the north had been worked and redistributed across the continent. "We'll need to expand the excavation," Dr. Chen said, already marking new areas on the site map. "And we'll need specialists, metallurgists, cultural anthropologists, experts in prehistoric trade patterns." She looked up at John. "Mr. Miller, this is going to attract attention, a lot of attention." As if on cue, Jenny's phone buzzed with a news alert. The local paper had already picked up the story. Major archaeological discovery on local farm. She showed it to her father, both of them reading as more details emerged online. "The university will want to hold a press conference," Dr. Chen said carefully. "People need to understand the significance of what we've found here. This isn't just about copper trading. It's about rewriting our understanding of prehistoric civilization in North America." John looked out his kitchen window at the field where he'd grown up, where his father had taught him to farm, where generations of millers had worked the soil. Now that same soil was yielding a different kind of harvest, one that would change not just his life, but history itself. "What do you need from me?" he asked, feeling the weight of his pocket watch, the weight of history, pressing against his chest. Dr. Chen smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Just what you've already given us, Mr. Miller, the chance to uncover the truth about who we are and where we came from. Everything else will follow from that." The first news van arrived before sunrise, its satellite dish cutting a sharp silhouette against the pink morning sky. By breakfast, 3 more had joined it, their crews setting up cameras along the gravel drive. John watched from his porch, coffee cooling in his hands, as his farm became a media circus. Local farmer uncovers ancient trade center scrolled across the bottom of screens nationwide. The university's hastily arranged press conference had done little to contain the story's spread. Now, everyone wanted a piece of the mystery beneath his fields. "Mr. Miller," a reporter in crisp khakis waved from behind the temporary fence. The university had installed. "Can we get a statement about the discovery?" John touched his pocket watch, drawing comfort from its steady ticking. Before he could respond, Jenny appeared at his side, handling the situation with a poise that surprised him. "My father is working closely with the archaeological team," she announced, her voice carrying across the drive. "We'll have more information at this afternoon's official press briefing." Inside, Dr. Chen was conducting a live interview via video. A call, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the growing chaos outside. "The significance of this site cannot be overstated," she explained to the national morning show host. "We're looking at evidence of sophisticated trade networks that predate any previously known settlements in this region." The camera feed showed John's kitchen table, now covered with maps and artifacts, telling a story of ancient commerce that had slumbered beneath his cornfields for millennia. "Dr. Chen," the host pressed, "there are rumors that several museums are already expressing interest in the artifacts. Has anyone reached out to acquire items from the site?" John's head snapped up. It hadn't occurred to him that people would want to take pieces of the discovery away from the farm. "Any artifacts recovered belong to the historical record," Dr. Chen replied diplomatically. "Our focus right now is on proper documentation and preservation." But the question had opened a floodgate. By midday, John's phone was ringing constantly, with calls from museum curators, private collectors, and documentary producers. Each one wanted something: access, artifacts, exclusive rights to tell the story. The local community wasn't immune to the excitement. Old friends stopped by, some offering congratulations, others thinly veiled suggestions about monetizing the discovery. Bill Henderson, whose family had farmed the neighboring land for 3 generations, pulled John aside during an afternoon. "Lull, you're sitting on a gold mine, John," Bill said, gesturing toward the excavation site. "Private collectors would pay a fortune for authenticated pieces from a site like this. Just something to think about." John felt the weight of his pocket watch, 5 generations of Miller history pressing against his chest. "It's not about the money, Bill." "Everything's about money these days," Bill replied, but his eyes held something like envy mixed with concern. "Just don't let them take advantage of you. These university types, they'll get their grants and their papers published, but what will you have left?" The question lingered as John watched the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his transformed farm. Camera crews filmed their stand-ups against the backdrop of white research tents, telling the world about the treasures beneath his soil. Local teenagers gathered at the property line, snapping photos for social media. His quiet life was disappearing faster than morning dew. Jenny found him in the barn that evening, seeking refuge among the familiar smells of oil and hay. She held up her phone, showing him how the story had spread. Miller farm discovery was trending. People were sharing maps of ancient trade routes, speculating about what else might be buried in the region's farms. "You okay, Dad?" John pulled out his pocket watch, opening its worn case. "Your great-great-grandfather bought this watch when he first purchased this land," he said quietly. "Probably walked right over those ancient markers, never knowing what was down there. Now the whole world's watching us dig up the past." Jenny leaned against his workbench. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. This farm has always been about legacy, what we leave for the next generation. Now it's just a different kind of legacy." Outside, the last of the news vans was packing up, but John knew they'd be back tomorrow. His world had changed the moment. His plow had struck that buried copper, and there was no going back. The only question was how to move forward while holding on to what mattered most. The crisp envelope from the State Historical Preservation Office lay unopened on John's kitchen table, its official seal gleaming under the morning light. He'd been staring at it for an hour, his coffee going cold beside the stack of papers Dr. Chen had left for him to review. The land deed sat next to the envelope, its edges worn soft with age. John Miller, Senior's bold signature stretched across the bottom, a legacy written in fading ink. He pulled out his pocket watch. "It's familiar. Weight offering little comfort today." "You should open it," Jenny said, sliding into the chair across from him. She delayed her return to college, taking her classes online to help manage the growing chaos at the farm. "They want to claim the site," John said, finally picking up the envelope. "Historical preservation laws. Emergency declaration." The letter confirmed his fears. Words like significant cultural heritage and immediate state oversight jumped from the page. They weren't asking, they were telling. Dr. Chen arrived as he was finishing the letter, her expression suggesting she already knew its contents. "Mr. Miller, I know this is overwhelming." Overwhelming. John stood, pacing his kitchen like a caged animal. "They're talking about declaring my entire Northfield a protected site, land my family has farmed for generations. The university's legal team wants to meet," she said gently. "There are ways to protect both the site and your interests." Jenny picked up the letter. "What about the artifacts they've already found? Who owns those?" It was the question that had been keeping John awake at night. The copper pieces, the stone, markers, the countless smaller items emerging from his soil. Each one felt like it was being pulled from his own history. "Technically," Dr. Chen began, choosing her words carefully, "artifacts found on private property belong to the landowner, but there are ethical and legal considerations." "There sure are," a new voice cut in. Howard Maxwell, the county's most prominent lawyer, filled the kitchen doorway. John had called him the previous evening, an old friendship finally cashed in. "The Millers have worked this land for 5 generations," Howard continued, setting his briefcase on the table. "You can't just walk in and claim it for the state without due process and fair compensation." Dr. Chen straightened. "No one's trying to claim anything. We're trying to preserve a site of incredible historical significance while publishing papers and advancing careers," Howard countered. "Tell me, Doctor, how many grant applications have already been filed based on this discovery?" "That's not fair," Jenny interjected. "Dr. Chen's team has been nothing but professional." "Professional, yes," Howard agreed. "But let's be clear about motivations. The university wants the prestige of the discovery. The state wants control of the site. Museums want the artifacts. Everyone wants a piece of Miller land." John touched the pocket watch in his coveralls, thinking of all the Millers who had carried it before him. Each had faced their own challenges, their own decisions about the land. "What are my options?" he asked Howard. The lawyer pulled out several documents. "We can fight the state's declaration, challenge their authority to seize control, or—" He paused, sliding another paper forward. "We can negotiate, but from a position of strength." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, please. This site doesn't just belong to your family. It belongs to history, to all of us. What we're learning here could change our understanding of prehistoric America." "It's still my land," John said quietly. "Yes," she agreed. "But with that ownership comes responsibility. These artifacts, these structures, they tell a story that's been waiting thousands of years to be heard." The morning sun tracked across his kitchen floor as John stood at the crossroads of past and future. His pocket watch ticked steadily, marking time as he weighed generations of family history against millennia of human heritage. "I want to protect the site," he said finally, "but I won't be pushed aside. This is still Miller land." Howard nodded, pulling out a pen. "Then let's make sure it stays that way, on your terms." As they began discussing legal strategies, John looked out at his fields, where research tents had replaced the corn he should have been tending. Whatever happened next would change not just his life, but his family's legacy. He just hoped he was making the right choice. The morning fog hadn't yet lifted when the excavation team made the breakthrough. John heard the shouts from his back porch, where he'd been reviewing Howard's draft agreement with the state. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the early quiet, calling for lights and additional equipment. "Dad!" Jenny burst out the screen door. "They've found something big!" The main excavation pit had grown over the past week, a carefully gridded depression that stepped down into the earth like an amphitheater. Students and researchers crowded. Around one corner, their excitement palpable in the morning air, Dr. Chen spotted them approaching. "Mr. Miller, you need to see this." As they carefully made their way down the step sides, John could see a dark opening in the pit wall, a void where solid earth should be. Dr. Chen's team had installed temporary lighting, the bright beams, cutting through the darkness to reveal what looked like a deliberately constructed chamber. "It's some kind of storage room or workshop," Dr. Chen explained, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. "And look at this!" She directed their attention to a collection of objects carefully arranged along one wall. Tools of various sizes and shapes, their copper surfaces dulled by time, but their craftsmanship unmistakable. Hammers, chisels, blades, and implements whose purposes they could only guess at, all preserved in their original positions. "The preservation is incredible," one of the graduate students breathed, carefully photographing each item in situ. "It's like they just set them down and walked away." John knelt beside the chamber entrance, his pocket watch swinging free from his coveralls. The ticking seemed louder in the confined space, counting off seconds that stretched back millennia. "These aren't just random tools," Dr. Chen continued, pointing to the distinctive patterns. "Look at the systematic organization, the graduated sizes. This was a master craftsman's collection." International experts were already joining the examination via video calls, their faces appearing on tablets held by graduate students. The excitement crossed language barriers as they discussed the implications of the find. The level of sophistication is remarkable, a British archaeologist commented through one of the screens. These tools suggest knowledge of metallurgy far beyond what we previously attributed to this period. Jenny, who had been studying the chamber's construction, called out from the far corner, "Dr. Chen, there's something else here." The team shifted their attention. Behind a slight projection in the wall, Jenny had spotted what looked like a series of marks carved into the stone surface. "Incredible," Dr. Chen whispered, examining the marks. These could be some form of notation, records, kept by the craftsmen themselves. The morning stretched into afternoon as the team meticulously documented every aspect of the chamber. Each tool was photographed, measured, and mapped before being carefully removed for preservation. John watched the process with mixed emotions, feeling both pride and loss as each piece of history was lifted from his soil. "The tools tell us so much," Dr. Chen explained as they worked. "See these wear patterns. They show expertise developed over years of practice. These weren't just workers, they were artists, engineers, masters of their craft." A specialist in ancient metallurgy, conferencing in from Arizona, pointed out distinctive features. "The hammer designs are particularly fascinating. They show an understanding of force distribution that we didn't think existed in North America at this time." As the sun climbed higher, more discoveries emerged. Small copper ingots, partially worked pieces, and what appeared to be teaching tools, simplified versions perhaps used to train apprentices. "It's not just a workshop," Dr. Chen concluded, making notes as she surveyed the chamber. This was a school, a place where knowledge was passed down, where techniques were refined and taught to new generations. John thought about his own family's legacy of passing down farming knowledge through the generations. He touched the pocket watch, thinking about how his father had taught him to read the seasons, to know the soil, to understand the rhythms of the land. "They were like us," he said quietly. Dr. Chen looked up. "Mr. Miller, they passed down their knowledge, parent to child, just like we do, just like my family's done on this farm." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Different tools, different times, but the same human desire to teach, to preserve, to pass on what we know. The day's light was fading when they finally stepped back from the chamber. Tomorrow would bring more discoveries, more experts, more pieces of the puzzle, but for now, John stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at the space where ancient craftsmen had once taught their trade, and felt a connection that transcended time. His pocket watch ticked steadily, marking time as it had for generations of millers. But now its rhythm seemed to echo with older rhythms, the tap of copper hammers, the patient instruction of master to apprentice, the eternal human drive to create and to teach. The security cameras were Jenny's idea. After the tool cache discovery made national news, she insisted on installing a basic surveillance system. John had thought it unnecessary. Who would bother with an archaeological dig in the middle of nowhere? But at 3 a.m, when his phone buzzed with motion alerts, he was grateful for his daughter's foresight. The grainy night vision footage showed 3 figures moving through the excavation site, their flashlight beams bouncing off the protective tarps. John's hand went to his pocket watch as he dialed the sheriff's number from memory. "Someone's at the dig site," he said when Sheriff Martinez answered. 3 of them. Looks like they know what they're after." "Stay inside," Martinez ordered. "We're 5 minutes out." But John was already pulling on his boots. 5 generations of millers had protected this land, and he wasn't about to stop now. Jenny appeared in the hallway, her own phone showing the live feed. "I'm calling Dr. Chen," she said, already dialing. "The artifacts—" "Get the lights," John replied, heading for the door. "All of them." The farm's floodlights blazed to life, turning night to day across the north field. John heard Startled shouts from the direction of the dig site saw figures scrambling for cover. His truck's engine roared as he drove toward the excavation, hoping to cut off their escape route. Sheriff Martinez's cruiser appeared from the opposite direction, lights flashing. The intruders scattered, but they'd forgotten about the stepped sides of the excavation pit. One stumbled, dropping what looked like professional archaeological tools. "Stop right there!" Martinez's voice boomed through her cruiser's speaker. Two figures made it to a waiting car, but the third was trapped in the pit. By morning, the story had spread through the county. The captured intruder turned out to be connected to a notorious antiquities trafficking ring. The tools they'd dropped were specialized equipment for extracting delicate artifacts. "They knew exactly what they were looking for," Dr. Chen said, examining the pit for damage. The university had sent additional security personnel who were now setting up a more permanent presence. "The tool cache has made this site a target." John stood at the edge of the pit, watching the sunrise paint his fields gold. The pocket watch ticked steadily, a rhythm 5 generations old, while FBI agents photographed tire tracks and took statements. "You should have waited for the sheriff," Jenny scolded, but her voice held pride beneath the concern. Before John could respond, Bill Henderson's truck pulled up, followed by other neighbors. They carried thermoses of coffee and bags of breakfast. "Sandwiches from the local diner. Heard what happened on the scanner," Bill said, handing John a coffee. "Thought you might need some backup." More community members arrived throughout the morning. Farmers parked their trucks at strategic points around the property. The local hardware store donated materials for better fencing. The high school's welding class offered to fabricate secure storage containers for the artifacts. "This isn't just your discovery anymore, John," Bill said, watching the improvised security measures take shape. "It's part of our community now." Dr. Chen joined them, looking impressed by the local response. "We've been offered a dedicated security team from the university, but nothing beats neighbors watching out for neighbors." Sheriff Martinez finished, accepting a fresh coffee. "Though we'll take the extra help. The attempted theft had transformed the site overnight. What had been an open-air archaeological dig was becoming a fortified research station. Security cameras and motion sensors were being installed alongside the scientific equipment. The tool cache and other valuable artifacts would be moved to secure storage each night. Yet something else had changed too. The community's response had shifted the dynamic. This wasn't just a scientific site or a legal battleground anymore. It was becoming part of the local identity, something people felt personally invested in protecting. John touched his pocket watch, thinking about how his ancestors had relied on neighbors during hard times. Some things hadn't changed much in 5 generations, or even in 5 millennia. He realized, looking at the ancient workshop where craftsmen had once taught their skills to a community's next generation. "We'll need a schedule," Jenny was saying, organizing the volunteers. "Regular patrols, check-in points." John watched his daughter take charge, saw how naturally she bridged the gap between the academic world and their farming community. The security threat had revealed something important. This discovery, whatever it meant for history, belonged first to the people who called this land home. The carbon dating results arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted from a specialized lab in Sweden. Dr. Chen had gathered her core team in John's kitchen, now permanently transformed into a research hub. The familiar smell of coffee mingled with the musty scent of ancient artifacts carefully laid out on preservation mats. John sat at his own table, feeling both host and observer as Dr. Chen pulled up the data on her laptop. Jenny leaned forward, her agricultural science background giving her just enough knowledge to make the numbers meaningful. "The organic material from the workshop dates to approximately 4,800 years ago," Dr. Chen announced, her voice carefully controlled, "with a margin of error of plus or minus 50 years. The implications hit the room like a physical force. Nearly 5,000 years of human history lay buried in John's fields. The pocket watch in his coveralls suddenly felt young by comparison. That's impossible, one of the graduate students whispered. That would make this site older than any known copper-working site this far east, Dr. Chen finished. And the metallurgical analysis suggests these weren't imported tools. They were made here. She pulled up more data, chemical compositions, wear patterns, tool designs. The evidence painted a picture that challenged everything they thought they knew about prehistoric North America. The copper's definitely from the Upper Peninsula mines, a metallurgist confirmed via video call. But the working techniques, they're unprecedented for this time period and location. These artisans had knowledge we didn't think existed in North America until thousands of years later. John watched the academics struggle with their shifting worldview. He thought about his own preconceptions about his land. How many times had he ploughed that field, never knowing what lay beneath? There's more, Dr. Chen continued. The notations Jenny found in the workshop. We've had experts in ancient writing systems examining them. They show characteristics of a systematic recording method, not just random marks, but an actual attempt to preserve information. The implications were staggering. Writing systems weren't supposed to exist in North America at this time. Yet here was evidence of prehistoric craftsmen recording their knowledge, teaching their skills, building a civilization far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. My father used to tell stories, John said quietly, drawing everyone's attention, about how the old ones said this land was special, sacred even. The first millers didn't believe those stories, called them superstitions. He pulled out his pocket watch, its silver case catching the morning light. 5 generations of my family worked this soil, never knowing we were walking on someone else's stories. Dr. Chen nodded. That's often how it goes. We build our lives on layers of history we don't even know exist. But sometimes, she gestured to the artifacts, sometimes the past finds ways to speak to us. The team spent hours going through the data, comparing dates, analyzing patterns. Each piece of evidence pushed the boundaries of accepted history. A little further, the site wasn't just old, it was revolutionary. We'll face challenges, Dr. Chen warned. Some colleagues will resist these findings. They contradict too many established theories. The evidence speaks for itself, Jenny argued, her confidence growing with each new revelation. The dates, the artifacts, the writing system, it's all documented. They can't ignore it. People ignore what they don't want to see, John said, thinking of old Joe and his lifetime of searching. Sometimes it takes a fresh pair of eyes. As if to emphasize his point, a young graduate student burst in with new data from the ground-penetrating radar. The workshop wasn't an isolated structure. It was part of a larger complex. The site had been a permanent settlement, not just a temporary trading post. They were looking at the remains of a prehistoric urban center. John stood by his kitchen window, watching teams of researchers swarm across his fields like ants on a hill. Each hour brought new discoveries, new questions, new challenges to old certainties. His pocket watch marked time as it always had, but now its ticking seemed to echo with older rhythms, the tap of ancient hammers, the murmur of forgotten languages, the steady pulse of human progress. "Your father was right," Dr. Chen said, joining him at the window. "This land is special, and now we're finally learning why." The Smithsonian's offer arrived by courier, hand-delivered in a thick envelope bearing the institution's official seal. The museum's representative, Dr. Eleanor Wright, sat across from John at his kitchen table, her tailored suit a stark contrast to his worn coveralls. Howard Maxwell studied the document beside them, making notes in the margins. $10 million, Dr. Wright stated, her voice carrying the weight of authority, for exclusive rights to the artifacts and primary research access to the site, plus naming rights for the eventual exhibition space, the Miller Collection of pre-Columbian artifacts. John's pocket watch ticked in the silence that followed. Through his window he could see the research tents where Dr. Chen's team continued their work, unaware of the conversation that could change everything. The Smithsonian can provide resources that no other institution can match, Dr. Wright continued. Climate-controlled storage, world-class conservation facilities, access to the finest researchers in the field. Howard cleared his throat. And ownership of everything found on the property would transfer to the museum, with full credit to the Miller family, of course. Your name would be permanently associated with one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in North American history. Jenny entered from the back door, freezing when she sensed the tension in the room. She'd been helping catalogue new finds from the expanded excavation area, her hands still dusty from the dig. The university has been doing good work, John said, watching his daughter's expression shift as she understood what was happening. They have, Dr. Wright agreed diplomatically, but this discovery is simply too important to leave to a regional institution. These artifacts belong in our nation's premier museum, where millions of visitors can appreciate their significance. They belong to the land, Jenny interjected, her voice sharp, to the community that's protected them. Dr. Wright's smile remained professional. My dear, preservation of cultural heritage requires more than good intentions. The Smithsonian has centuries of experience in protecting and presenting artifacts of this caliber. John touched his watch, thinking of how many times it had been repaired by old Mr. Peterson at the local jewelry store. Not the fanciest work, perhaps, but done with care and understanding of its significance to the Miller family. There are other offers to consider, Howard mentioned, pulling out competing proposals. The Field Museum in Chicago, several private collectors who would lock these treasures away in private vaults, Dr. Wright countered. The Smithsonian ensures public access, educational opportunities. Public access 1,000 miles away, Jenny cut in. What about the local schools that have been bringing students to learn about their own history? The community members who've been protecting the site? The debate was interrupted by Dr. Chen's arrival. She took in the scene quickly, recognizing Dr. Wright from academic circles. The Smithsonian's made an offer, John explained, watching both women carefully. Dr. Chen nodded, unsurprised. I wondered when they'd come. Eleanor's reputation for acquiring significant finds is well known. Something in her tone made John look closer at Dr. Wright, whose smile had gained a predatory edge. Sarah, Dr. Wright acknowledged. Still pursuing your theory about indigenous knowledge transmission? How committed of you. The tension in the room thickened. John thought about the ancient craftsmen who had worked this land, teaching their skills to new generations. They hadn't sent their knowledge to some distant center of power. They'd built it here, shared it here. The money would secure Jenny's future. Howard pointed out quietly. Pay off the farm's debts, set up a foundation in the Miller name. John stood, walking to his window. The morning sun caught the copper surfaces of newly unearthed artifacts being carefully cleaned by students he now knew by name. Bill Henderson's truck was parked at the north end of the site, keeping watch. Local volunteers moved between research stations, carrying equipment and sharing discoveries with the enthusiasm of people connecting with their own history. $10 million is a generous offer, he said finally. It's a fair price for history. Dr. Wright replied. John turned back to the table, his hand resting on his pocket watch. But that's just it, isn't it? You can't put a price on history, not real history, not the kind that lives in the soil and the stories and the people who keep them alive. Mr. Miller, Dr. Wright's voice held a note of warning. Be reasonable. This site's significance extends far beyond this small community. You're right, he agreed. It does. That's why it needs to stay here, where it was found, where it can tell its story, in the place where it happened. Dr. Wright gathered her papers, years of practice keeping her frustration in check. You're making a mistake. Without proper institutional support, we are the proper institution. Jenny stepped forward. The university, the community, the people who've been here all along. We're not just going to dig up our history and ship it away. After Dr. Wright left, Howard remained behind, looking concerned. John, That was a lot of money to walk away from. Some things are worth more than money, John replied, watching Dr. Chen and Jenny return to the dig site together. Some things need to stay where they belong. Main Street had changed more in the past month than in the previous decade. The old Parkway Motel, which hadn't seen a full parking lot since the interstate bypassed the town, now had a waiting list. Linda's diner served breakfast to archaeologists. From 3 continents, her menu expanded to include international options. Even the shuttered pharmacy had reopened as a visitor center, its windows displaying maps of ancient trade routes. John noticed these changes during his weekly supply run, his truck moving slowly through the transformed downtown. His pocket watch showed he was running late for the town hall meeting, but people kept stopping him to talk. "John, got a minute?" Mike Thompson waved from his real estate office. "You wouldn't believe the calls I'm getting. Everyone wants property near the site. Land values have doubled." The community center's parking lot was full when John arrived. Jenny had saved him a seat near the front, where Mayor Rodriguez was trying to maintain order among the crowd. "One at a time, please," the mayor called out. "We need to address these issues systematically." The issues were numerous: traffic control, accommodation shortages, pressure on local services. Tourism had exploded since the carbon dating results went public, bringing both opportunity and strain to the small community. "My restaurant can't handle the volume," Linda complained. "I've got tour buses showing up without warning. We need some kind of coordination." "The high school's archaeology club wants to help with the dig," Principal Wagner added. "Dr. Chen's offered to provide training, but we need insurance clearance." Bill Henderson stood up. "What about the farmers? These tour groups are blocking access roads during harvest season. We need designated routes." John watched his neighbors grapple with their town's sudden fame. The pocket watch ticked steadily against his chest, marking time as the community he'd known all his life reshaped itself around the discovery. "We've prepared a preliminary development plan," Mayor Rodriguez announced, unveiling a large map. "A dedicated visitor center here, parking facilities here, and a shuttle service to reduce traffic to the site." The map showed other changes too. Walking trails connecting historical points of interest, a proposed museum location, areas zoned for new businesses. The sleepy farming town was reinventing itself as a cultural heritage destination. "What about preservation?" Jenny asked, pointing to older buildings marked for development. "We can't just erase our recent history to showcase ancient history." Her comment sparked a deeper discussion. How could the town embrace its new identity while maintaining its character? The archaeological site had revealed layers of history beneath the soil, but the community had its own layers of stories, traditions, and relationships. "Maybe that's the point," Sarah Chen offered from her seat near the back. "This discovery isn't just about ancient artifacts. It's about understanding how communities build on what came before. How knowledge and culture pass through generations." John thought about the ancient craftsmen who had chosen this location for their workshop. They too must have built a community here, drawn others to learn and trade, changed the landscape with their presence. The meeting continued past sunset, neighbors who'd barely spoken before now passionately debating their shared future. The visitor center would incorporate the pharmacy's original Art Deco facade. Linda would train local youth to help handle the restaurant's increased business. Bill Henderson would help coordinate harvest season access with the tour operators. Walking out into the evening air, John saw his town with new eyes. The archaeology. Students drinking coffee on Linda's patio weren't just visitors. They were becoming part of the community, sharing meals with locals, learning the town's stories, even as they uncovered older ones. "It's not what we expected, is it?" Jenny said, falling into step beside him. "When you first hit that metal in the field." John touched his pocket watch, thinking of all the changes it had witnessed through 5 generations of millers. "Your grandfather used to say farming was about more than just growing crops. It was about growing community." They drove home past The lit research tents in the North Field, where day and night shifts kept the careful work of excavation going. The site security team, mostly local volunteers, waved as they passed. The discovery hadn't just unearthed ancient artifacts. It had uncovered something in the community itself, a capacity for change, for growth, for seeing their home through new eyes while holding on to what mattered most. Like the layers of earth in the excavation pit, they were adding their own story to the countless others that had come before. The government convoy arrived at dawn, 3 black SUVs and a truck loaded with equipment. John watched from his porch as men and women in official windbreakers emerged, carrying clipboards and cases of specialized gear. His pocket watch showed 6:15 a.m., too early for this kind of operation without prior notice. Dr. Chen's car pulled in moments later, her arrival clearly expected by the federal team. She spoke briefly with their leader before hurrying to join John. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "They called late last night. The National Heritage Protection Act requires immediate security measures for sites of this significance." A tall woman in a crisp suit approached, offering her hand. "Mr. Miller, I'm Diana Kovacs, Department of Interior. We're here to implement federal protection protocols for the site." "My understanding," John replied carefully, "was that we had a cooperative agreement in place with the state. This supersedes state-level oversight." Kovacs gestured to her team, already unloading equipment. The recent attempted theft and the site's growing international significance require enhanced security measures. Jenny emerged from the house, phone in hand. "I've already called Howard," she told her father quietly. "He's on his way." The federal team moved with practiced efficiency, setting up surveillance equipment and marking boundaries with professional-grade fencing. Their presence changed the atmosphere of the site. What had been a busy but casual research environment was becoming something more formal, more restricted. "We'll need to establish a secure perimeter," Kovacs explained, spreading out detailed plans on John's kitchen table. "Limited access points, 24-hour monitoring, restricted zones." "What about the local volunteers?" Jenny asked. "The community members who've been helping protect the site?" "All site access will need to be properly credentialed going forward. Background checks, formal authorization. These people are my neighbors," John interrupted. "They've guarded this land without credentials or authorization. Because it matters to them." Dr. Chen stepped in diplomatically. "Perhaps we could develop a hybrid system, integrate the local security volunteers into the federal protection framework." Kovacs frowned at the suggestion, but before she could respond, Bill Henderson's truck pulled up outside. Other neighbors followed. Linda from the diner bringing coffee and breakfast, Mike Thompson and his son carrying their security patrol logbooks, high school students who'd been helping catalog finds. "Word travels fast," Jenny said, watching. The impromptu gathering through the window. The federal team's installation work slowed as they navigated around the local volunteers, who continued their usual tasks with pointed determination. Howard Maxwell arrived with state-level heritage protection documents, engaging Kovacs in detailed legal discussions. John stood at the edge of the growing activity, feeling the weight of his pocket watch. 5 generations of Millers had protected this land with simple tools and determination. Now it seemed everyone wanted a piece of that responsibility. "Mr. Miller," Kovacs approached again, her expression softened somewhat. "I understand your concerns, but you have to understand. This site represents a profound shift in our understanding of prehistoric North America. We can't risk its protection being left to informal arrangements." "Nothing informal about it," Bill Henderson called over, having overheard. "We've got schedules, protocols, documentation of every security incident. Linda's diner crew handles the night shift. Mike's real estate office coordinates the daytime patrols. Principal Wagner's students maintain the security cameras." Dr. Chen joined them, adding, "The community's system has been remarkably effective. They caught the artifact thieves when professional security couldn't." Kovacs looked from the federal team's high-tech equipment to the local volunteers who moved through the site with the ease of long familiarity. Her department's protocols didn't have categories for this kind of organic security network. Perhaps, she said slowly, we could establish a pilot program, integrate federal resources with local expertise. It would be unprecedented. Like everything else about this site, John noted. The morning progressed with careful negotiations. The federal team's security systems would be installed, but local volunteers would be trained to operate them. Background checks would be expedited for community members with established site involvement. The Department of Interior would provide resources and training, while preserving the existing security network structure. It's not perfect, Howard told John later, reviewing the amended agreements. But it keeps the community involved while adding federal protection, and more importantly, it sets a precedent. John watched the sunset paint his transformed fields in familiar colors. The new security fencing gleamed alongside worn paths made by local patrols. Federal technicians worked beside high school students, installing equipment and sharing knowledge. His pocket watch ticked steadily, marking time as ancient and modern, local and federal, professional and personal found ways to protect something larger than themselves. The land had always needed guardians. Now it was simply adding new layers to its defense, just as it had added layers to its history. The Journal of North American Archaeology's special edition arrived in a plain brown envelope, but its contents were anything but ordinary. Dr. Chen had insisted that John receive the first copy, even before the university. Now it sat on his kitchen table, its cover featuring a high-resolution image of the copper tools found in his field. "Read it," Jenny urged, practically bouncing with excitement. She'd helped compile data for several of the papers included in the volume. John pulled out his pocket watch, checking the time. 4:30 a.m., his usual waking hour. But today was different. Today, his farm's secret history would be revealed to the academic world. The journal's editor had taken the unusual step of including a public-friendly introduction, recognizing the site's significance beyond academic circles. The Miller Farm discovery, rewriting the prehistory of North America, blazed across the first page. Below it, photographs and diagrams detailed the careful work of the past months, transforming bits of copper and stone into a revolutionary new understanding of the past. Dr. Chen arrived as John was midway through the main article, bringing fresh coffee and an air of nervous excitement. "The online version goes live in an hour," she said, checking her phone. "Every major university will have access." "Any predictions?" Jenny asked, pouring coffee for everyone. "Controversy," Dr. Chen replied honestly. "We're challenging a lot of established theories. Some colleagues won't appreciate having their life's work questioned." The papers laid out the evidence methodically. The carbon dating of organic materials found in the workshop, the metallurgical analysis of the copper tools, proving local manufacture, the systematic notation system that suggested a complex knowledge-sharing culture, each piece built upon the others, creating an irrefutable picture of sophisticated civilization where none was supposed to exist. "Look at this," Jenny pointed to a passage. "They're citing my observations about the soil composition. Dad, I'm published in a major journal." John smiled at his daughter's excitement, remembering how she'd once dreamed of revolutionizing farming techniques. Now she was helping revolutionize history instead. The kitchen filled with light as the sun rose, and with it came the first reactions. Dr. Chen's phone buzzed constantly with notifications as academics around the world accessed the publications. Emails poured in, questions, congratulations, and yes, challenges. "Professor Williams from Berkeley disputes our dating methodology," Dr. Chen reported, scanning messages. "But Dr. Patel from Oxford is supporting our conclusions about the metallurgical techniques." John watched the debate unfold through the lens of academic discourse, so different from the practical knowledge that had guided his farming. His pocket watch ticked steadily as centuries of accepted history were questioned and reassessed. "Listen to this," Dr. Chen read from her laptop. The Miller Farm site demonstrates that our understanding of prehistoric North America has been not just incomplete but fundamentally flawed. The evidence of advanced metallurgy, systematic knowledge transmission, and established trade networks forces us to reconsider every assumption about pre-Columbian civilization in the region. They're calling it the Miller Revolution in archaeological theory, Jenny added, scrolling through academic social media. Dad, you're trending in university circles. The morning brought more visitors, local reporters first, then camera crews from national networks. Academics began arriving, hoping to see the site firsthand. Dr. Chen handled them all with practiced grace, but John noticed her pride when showing visitors the careful work her team had done. Your grandfather would never believe this, John told Jenny as they watched another TV crew set up. 5 generations of Millers worked this land, thinking we knew all its secrets. 6 generations now, Jenny corrected, and we're learning. New secrets every day. The journal lay open on the table, its pages telling the story of ancient craftsmen who had chosen this place to build, to teach, to create. Their knowledge, buried for millennia, had finally found its way back into the light. You know what this means, Dr. Chen said quietly, joining them at the window. Once the academic community accepts these findings, and they will, the evidence is too strong. Everything changes. Textbooks, museums, our whole understanding of prehistoric civilization in North America. John touched his pocket watch, thinking of how many sunrises it had witnessed over this land. Change isn't always bad, he said. Sometimes it's just the truth, finding its way home. The heritage site designation papers sat unopened next to the deed to the Miller Farm. John's pocket watch showed just past midnight, but sleep felt impossible with tomorrow's decision looming. The kitchen remained lit, a beacon in the dark farmland. As he studied both documents, Jenny sat across from him, her laptop open to spreadsheets filled with proposals and budgets. Dr. Chen had gone home hours ago, after helping them outline all possible options for the site's future. We could keep farming the unexcavated areas, Jenny suggested, not for the first time. The heritage designation doesn't require us to stop completely. Half measures, John replied, running his finger along the deed's worn edge. Either we commit to this new path or we don't. The decision wasn't just about the Millers anymore. The town had restructured itself around the discovery. The university had invested heavily in the research. The academic world was watching. Even the ancient craftsmen, John felt, were waiting to see what would become of their legacy. A soft knock at the screen door interrupted their thoughts. Bill Henderson stood outside, holding a thermos. "Figured you'd still be up," he said, stepping inside. "Brought Linda's coffee. She's still at the diner, feeding those European archaeologists who just flew in." The familiar smell of Linda's special blend filled the kitchen as Bill poured cups for everyone. "Made any decisions yet?" "Working on it," John replied, touching his pocket watch. "A lot to consider. Remember when our biggest worry was commodity prices?" Bill settled into a chair. "Now look at us. Heritage sites, international attention, academic journals. We could sell," Jenny said quietly. "After the heritage designation, developers would pay a fortune, build a proper museum, tourist facilities. The option hung in the air. They could walk away wealthy, let others handle the responsibility of preserving history. The Smithsonian's offer still stood, now backed by additional funding from private donors. "Your great-grandfather," Bill said thoughtfully. "He used to talk about being stewards, not just farmers. Said we weren't owning the land so much as taking care of it for the future." A car's headlights swept across the kitchen as Dr. Chen returned, carrying fresh site maps and satellite imagery. Despite the late hour, her enthusiasm remained undimmed. "I know it's late," she apologized, spreading out the materials. "But I wanted to show you something we just discovered in the new radar scans." The images revealed more structures, more evidence of the ancient community that had once thrived here. But what caught John's eye was how the old aligned with the new, how the ancient workshops mirrored the modern town's layout, how old paths matched current roads. They chose this place for a reason, Dr. Chen explained. The river access, the fertile soil, the natural resources. The same things that brought your family here brought them here first. John thought about the generations of millers who had worked this land, each adding their own layer to its history. He touched the heritage designation papers, feeling the weight of past and future in their official seals. If we do this, he said slowly, we do it right, not just preserving the past but building on it, teaching from it. Jenny straightened, recognizing the shift in her father's tone. You mean? I mean we keep the land. Work with the university, the town, everyone who's invested in this discovery. Make it something that honors both histories, theirs and ours. The decision, once made, felt right. Bill nodded approvingly. Dr. Chen tried to contain her smile, but failed. We'll need to restructure the farm operations. Jenny was already typing. Maybe develop educational programs, work with the school. And keep growing corn, John added. Firmly. Just around the ancient copper workshops. Dawn was breaking as they finalized the plans. The heritage designation would protect the archaeological sites while allowing controlled agricultural use of other areas. The university would establish a permanent research center integrated with community educational programs. The town would develop sustainable tourism infrastructure. John stood at his window, watching the sun rise over fields that had sustained so many generations. In so many ways. His pocket watch ticked steadily, marking the moment when one era flowed into another, just as it had for every miller before him. We're still farmers, he said quietly, just farming something different now, growing knowledge instead of just corn. Through the window, he could see the first research teams arriving for the day shift. Local volunteers checked in at the security station. A school bus full of students pulled up for their weekly archaeology program. The land was still providing, still teaching, still bringing people together. It was, he realized, exactly what it had always done for thousands of years before the first miller ever set plow to soil. The architect's renderings transformed John's weathered kitchen table into a window to the future. Three-dimensional holograms showed a modern research center rising from his fields, its design echoing both agricultural heritage and ancient copperworking traditions. Solar panels would provide power, while careful landscaping would preserve the site's historical sightlines. The educational center will be here, Jenny pointed, manipulating the hologram with practiced ease. We've designed it to handle school groups during the day and community programs in the evening. John checked his pocket watch. Nearly noon. In an hour, the first trial run of their new educational program would begin. Local teachers and university staff had worked for weeks to develop a curriculum that bridged ancient skills with modern learning. The key is hands-on engagement, Dr. Chen explained, adjusting her presentation materials. Students won't just learn about ancient copper working, they'll experience it, understand the skill and precision required. Principal Wagner arrived with the final participation numbers. We've had to create a waiting list, he reported. Every school district within 50 miles wants to be part of this. The educational center's design reflected this enthusiasm. Learning spaces would combine traditional classrooms with experimental archaeology areas. Students could study ancient metallurgy techniques, then try them using modern safety equipment. Agricultural science programs would explore how ancient and modern farming techniques intersected. Look at this, Jenny said proudly, pulling up another diagram. We're creating apprenticeship programs. High school students can learn site conservation, artifact preservation, research methodologies, real skills for future careers. The plans went beyond just archaeology. The site would host environmental studies, showing how ancient peoples had managed the land. Engineering students could study prehistoric construction techniques. Art classes could explore ancient design patterns. It's not just about the past, John realized, watching the hologram shift to show different activities. It's about using the past to build the future. Outside, construction teams were already preparing the ground for the new facilities. They worked carefully around marked archaeological areas, every shovel of soil scrutinized for artifacts. The contrast between ancient and modern, preservation and progress, was striking. Bill Henderson's grandson, Tommy, arrived with his high school technology club. They'd been helping develop virtual reality reconstructions of the ancient workshop, combining archaeological evidence with historical research to create immersive educational experiences. "Watch this," Tommy said excitedly, handing John a VR headset. "We've recreated the copper working process based on the tool marks we found." Through the headset, John watched ancient craftsmen move through their workshop, teaching techniques that had been lost to time. The recreation was based on careful study of wear patterns on recovered tools, working surfaces, and architectural remains. "The really cool part," Tommy continued, "is how we're linking it to modern metalworking. Students can see how ancient techniques influence modern methods." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of connection we want to emphasize. This isn't just ancient history. It's part of an ongoing human story of innovation and adaptation." The educational plans would roll out in phases. First, the school programs and community workshops. Then university-level field schools and research opportunities. Finally, professional development programs for teachers and museum educators from around the world. "We're already getting inquiries from international institutions," Jenny reported, checking her emails. "They want to use our program as a model for other heritage sites." John touched his pocket watch, thinking of all the lessons this land had taught his family over the generations. Now it would teach on a grander scale, sharing wisdom both ancient and modern with new generations of learners. "Dad," Jenny called, pointing to movement at the site entrance. "I think our first test group is here early." A school bus was indeed turning onto the farm's access road, carrying students from the local middle school. They would be the first to experience the new educational programs, to connect with the ancient craftsmen who had once taught their own apprentices on this same soil. "Ready?" Jenny asked, gathering her materials. John nodded, feeling the weight of both pocket watch and responsibility. "Let's go teach them about their heritage." The sun climbed high over the fields as ancient knowledge found new voices, new hands, new ways to shape the future. The land that had once grown corn would now grow understanding, cultivating connections across time between those who had worked, learned, and taught upon its soil. The UNESCO World Heritage Site Evaluation Team spoke 7 different languages between them, but their excitement needed no translation. They moved through the site with professional precision, documenting everything from soil composition to sight lines, from preservation methods to public engagement programs. John watched from the newly completed observation deck, his pocket watch marking time as the international experts examined his family's land. Dr. Chen stood beside him, providing context for their observations. "They're particularly impressed by the integration of research and education," she explained. "Most sites struggle to balance preservation with public access. We've made it central to our mission." The Miller Farm site had already transformed archaeological practice across North America. Teams from other locations visited regularly, studying not just the ancient artifacts, but the modern methods of community engagement and educational outreach. "Your father would be proud," Bill Henderson said, joining them at the railing. Though he might not believe it, his cornfields becoming a World Heritage Site. Below them, Jenny led a tour group of international archaeologists through the main exhibition area. The visiting scholars paused at each station, examining the innovative ways traditional farming knowledge had been integrated with archaeological understanding. "The copperworking techniques we've documented here have been found at sites in Europe and Asia," one of the UNESCO experts announced, reviewing her findings. This suggests trade networks far more extensive than previously imagined. The implications had rippled through the academic world. Similar sites were being discovered and re-examined across the continent, creating a new map of prehistoric civilization. The Miller Farm had become the key that unlocked a hidden network of ancient knowledge. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, pulling up a global research database on her tablet. Teams in Mongolia are finding copper working sites with nearly identical tool patterns. In Peru, they've discovered teaching spaces that mirror our workshop layout. John touched his pocket watch, thinking about how local knowledge could spread across oceans and centuries. The ancient craftsman who had worked his land had been part of something larger than anyone had imagined. The UNESCO team gathered in the new research center for their final deliberations. Maps covered the walls, showing how the Miller Farm site connected to ancient trade routes across continents. Displays demonstrated how prehistoric knowledge had flowed along these paths, creating networks of innovation and cultural exchange. "We're seeing similar educational structures at sites around the world," the lead evaluator explained. "Places where knowledge was not just used, but systematically taught and preserved." The Miller Farm site helps us understand how ancient peoples shared and maintained their technological expertise. Jenny had prepared a presentation on their latest findings. "We've identified matching tool marks at sites spanning 3 continents," she explained, highlighting connections on a digital globe. These weren't isolated communities. They were part of a sophisticated network of cultural and technological exchange. The implications went beyond archaeology. Climate scientists studied how ancient peoples had adapted to environmental changes. Metallurgists learned from prehistoric copper working techniques. Educational researchers examined how ancient teaching methods could inform modern practices. "This is why UNESCO recognition matters," Dr. Chen told John quietly. "It's not just about preserving the past. It's about understanding who we are as a species, how we learn, how we adapt, how we pass knowledge through generations." The evaluation team moved through their checklist methodically, but their conclusion seemed foregone. The Miller Farm site didn't just meet UNESCO's criteria, it was redefining them, demonstrating how cultural heritage sites could serve both scientific research and public education. "Your land," the lead evaluator told John, "has become a bridge between past and present, local and global. The methods you've developed here will help sites around the world connect their communities with their heritage." As sunset painted the research center in golden light, John stood at his kitchen window one last time. Tomorrow, the UNESCO team would submit their formal recommendation. His quiet farm would likely become part of humanity's officially recognized heritage. His pocket watch ticked steadily, marking time as it had for generations of millers, but now its rhythm seemed to echo with older timepieces, with ancient tools marking time in workshops across continents, with knowledge flowing along, trade routes that had shaped human civilization. "We've started something here," Jenny said, joining him at the window, "something bigger than us." Through the gathering dusk, they could see lights coming on in the research center, where teams from around the world worked to understand the connections. Their land had helped reveal. The Miller Farm had become more than a site of discovery. It was a key to understanding humanity's shared heritage of innovation, adaptation, and education. 1 year to the day after John's tractor had struck that first piece of copper, hundreds of people gathered on the Miller Farm. The formal opening of the International Center for Ancient Technologies drew visitors from around the world, but at its heart, it remained a community celebration. John stood at the podium, his pocket watch secure in his coveralls, facing faces both familiar and new. Local farmers sat beside international scholars. School children mingled with archaeological experts, the ancient and modern, local and global, personal and universal. All converged on this patch of land that had held its secrets for so long. My, Great-great-grandfather bought this farm, believing he was starting something new, John began. None of us knew we were actually continuing something ancient, something that had been waiting beneath these fields for thousands of years. The morning sun illuminated the new facilities, research centers, educational spaces, conservation labs, but it also fell on carefully preserved agricultural areas where traditional farming techniques were still practiced alongside archaeological study. This land has always been about teaching, John continued. Whether it was ancient craftsmen passing down their skills, farmers teaching their children about soil and seasons, or now scholars and students learning from what lies beneath our feet. Jenny sat in the front row, her own contribution to the site's legacy spread before her. Detailed plans for future educational programs, research initiatives, and community engagement projects. The Miller farm had become more than a site of discovery. It was a place of ongoing learning and connection. Linda's Diner had catered the event, her international menu now featuring dishes inspired by ancient trade routes. Bill Henderson's grandchildren helped demonstrate virtual reality reconstructions of prehistoric workshops. The high school archaeology club gave tours of the educational facilities they had helped design. As the formal ceremony concluded, John walked the grounds with Dr. Chen, who had become both colleague and friend. They passed the original excavation site, now carefully preserved beneath protective covering, where a single mistaken sound had started everything. Sometimes the most important discoveries, Dr. Chen said, come from being willing to listen to what the land is trying to tell us. The time capsule was Jenny's idea, a way to connect past, present, and future. Into a specially designed container, they placed artifacts of their own time, photos of the excavation, copies of research papers, and messages to future generations. Among these modern items, they included a cast of the first copper tool they had found, binding ancient technology with contemporary understanding. John's pocket watch lay in his hand as he watched the time capsule being sealed. 5 generations of Millers had carried it, marking time as they worked this land. Now it would continue its journey, ticking toward a future where the past was not just preserved, but lived, learned from, and built upon. The sun set on the Miller farm's first day as an official international research and education center. Visitors departed, but the site remained alive with activity, researchers analyzing data, students exploring exhibits, community members sharing stories of their connection to this place. Standing in his kitchen one last time before moving to the new family residence on the property, John looked out over the transformed landscape. The fields that had once grown only corn now cultivated understanding, connection, and discovery. His father's words came back to him. Farming was about more than just growing crops. "Ready, Dad?" Jenny called from the doorway. A new group of international students was arriving, eager to learn about the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern discovery. John touched his pocket watch one final time, feeling the weight of all it represented. 5 generations of Millers, thousands of years of human innovation, and countless stories yet to be uncovered. "Ready," he replied, stepping forward into the next chapter of the land's long history. The watch ticked steadily in his pocket, marking time as it had always done, measuring moments in a story that stretched from ancient craftsmen to future generations, all connected by this one piece of earth that had never forgotten its purpose: to teach, to grow, to bring people together in the endless human journey of discovery.